Hello my friends, and a very warm welcome back to my painting channel. And in this video we're going to be painting a really cool duo, a double set of miniatures from the Steam-forged games Resident Evil 2 board game. We're actually going to be painting both Hunk and Tofu in this video. Both of these characters are quite monochrome, so both of these characters are very limited on their color palette. So this is going to be a really interesting and a really fun video to paint. So without further ado, we're going to start off straight away with Hunk, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a nice thin layer of German grey from Vallejo. This is one of the model colour paints from their range. This is a really nice sort of bluish grey colour. It's got a really nice dark tone to it, but it does also have this really nice blue sort of tint as well, giving us just that little bit more character and a little bit more colour from our model and from our miniature, instead of it just being one flat tone. So we're going to cover all of Hunk in this paint. As you can see, I'm just using a nice thin down version of this paint so that we can run maybe one or two coats depending on how this dries out and how much you need to sort of cover the model. So yeah, just going to cover the whole thing just like so. So for this I'm just using one of my basing brushes, so nothing too fancy, nothing too precise. Just going to cover everything all in a even coat at least. We don't want to allow the paint to blob or build up in any area, so we're just going to go around this as quickly as we can. So with this pair of characters, we're going to have a real interesting and good bit of fun, as I say, painting in a very sort of monotone kind of colour scheme. So we're going to go for a very sort of dulled down sort of grey tone for Hunk, and then we're going to do something a little bit different and just go kind of really light and creamy with Tofu. So we're going to then, once the German grey is dry on Hunk here, we're then going to go to black, and we're just going to use this nice flat black colour from the model colour range from Vallejo as well. So this one does dry down in a really nice matte effect, very similar to the German grey that we've just used. That will also dry down to a nice matte effect. These model colours from Vallejo always tend to have this really sort of nice finish to them. But what we're going to do with the black is we're just going to pick out a lot of the details. So we're going to paint Hunk's boots, we're going to paint the gun, we're going to paint a couple of the bags, but not all of the bags, just so that breaks up a little bit of the colour and things around that area. We're going to paint the straps of his rucksack, and maybe one or two parts of the rucksack as well, because again, just up and across the back you can see there are a few sort of pouches and patches and things like that. I'm also going to paint the pads, so the knee pads, shoulder pads, and of course the straps going around the arms and legs from these as well. And again, the idea with this is to just kind of slightly break that colour tone up. So although we're looking at a very monotone sort of setup here, although we're looking at a lot of greys and a lot of blacks and things like that, what we're going to try to do is not just paint the whole thing in a black colour. We're going to kind of give him a little bit of character and a little bit of colour just showing through as well. So we're trying to stick as close to the original artwork, as close to the original characters as we possibly can. And by doing so, we're not going to paint these to look like the newer versions of them from the more up-to-date Resident Evil game. We're going to paint them to make them look a lot more like the original characters. And the original Hunk character is very basic. So he does have a lot of black areas and a lot of dark areas, but there is also this sort of greyish tone as well to the uniform, and this is what's given me the idea to paint this with a sort of slight blue-grey tinge to it. The idea then is to just kind of break up all of that black and break up all of that darkness so that it creates a bit more character and gives him a little bit more to look at. Again, it makes it a lot more pleasing on the eye, and it gives you more than just one flat tone and colour. So once all of that is dry, I'm just going to quickly go over the model using a thin layer of Null Nil, as you can see. And the reason for this is because we've got the sort of bluish grey colour from the German grey, which looks great, but I just wanted to use a wash purely to put a little bit of black or a little bit of darkness just into the folds and creases that are going all around the uniform, so around the arms, around the legs. It'll also tie these two colours together quite nicely as well, so it'll tie the black and the grey together in a nice way. And that means when we start to build our colours back up, those tones and those colours are going to be tied together, and it's going to look really nice and even, and it's going to give it a really nice sort of finish to the model and a really nice sort of overall tone and look to the model as well. So as you can see, some of those areas where I painted black, so the rucksack, some of the bags, the boots, as we paint this Null Nil across, it just ties everything in to the right sort of tone. Now once that's dry, then I'm going to go back to the German grey. So we're just going to go to our more detailed brush now. So I'm using my size 0 detail brush and just using the German grey. As you can see, this time now I'm just going to use the very tip of the brush to just slowly build up all of those raised points. So just going to slowly build up all of the creases and folds and things like that on the uniform. As you can see with the arms and legs, there is a few really cool, great looking sort of folds and creases across the arms, across the uniform, across the sort of clothing. And that's all we're doing now, is just following those folds, following along the raised areas, just to build up that colour, just to give a little bit more, as I said. So we're not painting just this flat black, we are painting a little bit more of a tone, and this is giving us a little bit more character out of such a basic sort of colour scheme. So I'm going to paint all of the areas that I want to be this sort of colour. So as I say, the uniform itself, leaving all of the knee pads, the bags and things like that, the boots and things, leaving those nice and flat and black. And you can paint those with little bits of grey and things if you wanted to. For this sort of video, I'm going to try to keep things very basic, but also add enough character that it really stands out. So we're not going to go too extreme on this one. We're going to keep things nice and close to the original, as I say. We're going to try to keep things very close. So once that one is dry then, and the German grey is dried down, we're going to use a dark blue grey, again from the model colour range, and again using the very tip of the size 0 brush. You can see there I'm just going to slowly now pick out all of those creases and just be very precise and very detailed where I'm placing this blue grey colour. So we're just trying to pick out the most extreme sort of edges on the creases and on the folds of the clothing, as you can see. And the reason for this now is just it's giving us an idea and a control as to where the light is. So I'm going to focus this more towards the front of the arms and more towards the raised and sort of higher edges of the miniature, while I don't sort of paint this on the underneath of the arms and things like that. So that gives me a little bit more control as to where the light and dark, and gives us a little bit more contrast to the model, and a little bit more contrast to the idea of where the light is on the model as well. I'm just going to do the same thing across the legs here as well, just like so. Now you may notice there's one or two little mold lines on the model. Normally I try my best to take a lot of the mold lines out of models. The Resident Evil models, they can be quite difficult. The plastic that they use to make these, it can be quite difficult to sort of rub these down and sort of even these out. So sometimes some of those mold lines do get the better of me, and they do stay on the model. I know that there's a few of you that watch that really hate the mold lines, and that's absolutely fine. You can spend a little bit more time sort of working on those than I do. I know it might be a little bit frustrating to watch me paint over them, but it works for me, so don't worry too much. This is more of a guide of how to paint rather than how to remove the mold lines and things like that, so don't worry too much about the mold lines on my models. So yeah, just going to paint all around these creases, as you can see, trying to use the very tip of the brush, being as precise as I possibly can. This is sped up slightly. I do paint a lot slower than this, so don't feel like you have to rush your models. Try to take your time and really sort of spend your time building up those colours and building up the tones and textures as much as you would like. Once that's dry, I'm going to use a Riley Grey from the Fantasy and Games set from Scale Colour. So this is a Scale 75 paint. Now you don't have to do this one if you don't have this paint or you can't access this paint. Don't worry too much. This is purely just sort of a last minute sort of detail. This is just to build up a little bit of that blue vibrancy in those creases. So whereas I've painted the greys and there's a little bit of a blue grey, all I'm doing here is just adding a little bit more of a blue grey, so a little bit more blue into that grey, and just sort of building this blue colour and building this blue tone up and over the those creases, just to build that character, build that colour, giving it a little bit more of that blue tone. Again, this is a stage that you don't have to do if you don't have the paints. This is purely just an optional thing. If you can get hold of the paints and things like that, then you're more than welcome to follow along. If not, with the blue-grey, the dark blue-grey from Vallejo, you could always add a small, and I mean a very small amount of sort of a pale blue-grey to that, just to build that tone a little bit lighter and give yourself a little bit of a highlight should you want to. But for this one, like I say, this is just adding a little bit more blue colour to the textures and to the tones and to the folds. Once that's done, then I'm going to use a heavy red. This is a heavy opaque color, so this is a very, very thick color. So I'm just using this to base around the sort of glass in the eyes, and this is just going to separate all of those grays and dark sort of black colors and dark tones to having these really sort of protruding, really sort of red sort of eyes that are really going to stand off the model. These are really going to poke out on the model. As I say, with these Resident Evil sets, because I'm painting them like the old-fashioned sort of color schemes, so I'm painting them like the old video games. The old video games were released in the 90s, so things are quite dated, and the color scheme may seem a little bit odd on times, but it's purely just because we're following on and trying to stick as close to the source material as we possibly can, maybe having our own slight little intricate differences and our own little take on things on times as well. So once the heavy red is dry, then I'm just going to add a small amount of one of my favourite paints, the bloody red, just across the top half of the eye areas, just like so. And again, the reasoning for that is just to create this sort of nice vibrant sort of red tone, this nice colour, and give us an idea that the light is sort of just catching on the top of the eyes. You could always put a small white dot in if you wanted to, as an idea or an example of where the sort of light is catching on the eyes, but I haven't done that for this one. And then I'm going to use a small amount of ash grey from AK Interactive. Again, if you don't have this colour, you could always just use a pale grey, sort of a pale blue-grey colour from Vallejo. And that's all I'm doing with this, using the very, very tip of the brush now. So being as extremely careful as I possibly can. I'm just using a mixture of stippling and scratching motions just to create sort of scratches and broken sort of details and things like that across the knee pads, the helmet, and all these different kinds of bits, just kind of creating this illusion of scrapes and details and bits like that, so that it makes the plasticky areas and the armoured areas look a little bit more worn down and a little bit more sort of well used and well worn. Again, this is purely optional, you don't have to do this. This is just me putting and adding my own little take on it, just so that it gives a little bit more detail to something that is quite basic and quite flat. Once that is dry, then I'm going to use Gunmetal, again, one of the channel favourites. This is pretty much just Vallejo's version of Citadel's Lead Belcher, and this is a nice dark silver colour. And that's all I'm going to do with this dark silver, just try to drag this across the very extreme edges of his gun. And the reason for that is just so that it catches the light a little bit, and it means it makes the gun look, again, a little bit more worn, makes it look like some of the paint has chipped off the gun and some of the paint is just sort of run off or scratched off the gun as well, so that the gun doesn't just look like flat black. And that should be Hunk done. So that's the first part, that's Hunk completed, and then we're going to move on and paint Tofu. And with Tofu, we're going to paint something, again, very, very different kind of technique, different kind of system, and we're just going to try to have a little bit of fun with this one too. So we're going to start with an Army Painter skeleton bone, and that's all I'm going to do is just cover all of Tofu using this single sort of creamy sort of colour, this sort of creamy tone, just like so. So we're going to cover all of the model in this. As you can see, this is nice and thin, so we're not covering the model too extremely. This might take two nice thin coats to get the paint to cover the model to the extreme or to the level that we would like. Now, the cool thing with Tofu is there is a lot of texture on this model. As you can see when I'm applying the paint, you can see some of the texture there. But that's all we are going to do, is we're just going to use a nice straightforward simple stippling technique, and that's going to build a lot of texture and a lot of colour out of the model as well. So we're going to go for a slightly lighter cream now, using the Vallejo Bone White, and using the stippling technique and the stippling effect that I mentioned earlier. That's all we're going to do is use one of our basing brushes, so one of the brushes where all of the bristles are sort of warped and broken and worn, and that's all we're going to do is just using the tip of that, and we're just going to dab. As you can see, I'm just dabbing. It has been sped up a little, so don't worry too much. That's all I'm doing, is just dabbing the brush across the model, and this is creating this illusion of texture, because some of the colours and some of the original colour and the original tone from below, from the skeleton bone from the Army Painter, is going to show through, while some of these are going to give us a little bit more of a highlight on this bone white colour. So this is the first layer, and this is just building that texture, building that effect. You can already see the texture and the effect really starting to work on the sides here. And then it's up to you with how far or how extreme you want the texture to go. So you can add thicker areas and thinner areas and all things like that. And that's going to create, as I said, this illusion of texture, this kind of idea that there's sort of different tones and different colors and things like that, or lights coming through. Now once that's dry, I'm going to use Elfic Flesh. So this is again another creamy color. So this is a lighter cream tone now. And again, doing the same thing, as you can see, just using the stippling effect, just dabbing the paint across the miniature as much as I possibly can. Some parts we're going to leave a little bit with a little bit less, some parts we're going to add a little bit more, and again this is all about creating that illusion and that creation of texture and contrast. You don't have to be too precise with this, which is part of the fun. This is sort of a really fun, easy way to paint sort of something completely different, because I didn't think when I started painting on a painting channel that I would be painting a stick of tofu. To be fair, I didn't expect that at all, so this is quite interesting. Once that's done, then I'm going to focus just on the hands. So I'm going to use a ghost grey colour. With the hands then, instead of these being creamy, these are going to be specifically white, because again, trying to stick as close to the original artwork and as close to the original characters as possible. And if you take a look at any of the videos and pictures and things like that from the original games, tofu is practically just a white blob of tofu with white hands. So the reason why I painted him a little bit cream is just to make it a little bit different, a little bit more realistic in some ways, but trying to stick with the white sort of colours for the hands, and again that'll make the hands stand out quite a bit. Once that's done, then we're going to use the gunmetal as well, and we're just going to paint this just around this little dagger that he's got in his hand as well. Poor Tofu was left to fight off the zombie plague all on his own with just a knife to try to escape, so it's very, very hard sort of game mode to play on. Kudos if you managed to beat that years ago, because I never managed to complete that when I was younger, so extra points if you managed to beat the Tofu scenario, because it is very, very, very difficult. So once that is dry, then we're going to use a dead white, which is a nice vibrant white color, and that's all I'm going to do is paint this across the top of the ghost gray, leaving the ghost gray in the recess points between the fingertips, and I'm just going to paint this along the fingers and along the hands and things like that. So the ghost gray then will become our sort of very, very light shaded area, so that this means that the hands are nice and bright and vibrant and white, but at the same time then they also have a little bit of their own little shade. And once we're done, that is Tofu done. Tofu is very, 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 very simple, as you can see. And I wanted to try to make it a little bit different than just covering it all in one color, so adding that stippling effect and adding that texture and tone was part of the fun for that. Hunk, on the other hand, then has this really dark sort of tone, so the contrast between these two characters with the really light tones and the really dark tones has been a real cool, fun little challenge. And as you can see, those sort of bluey colours, that little blue tint and transition is really showing through on Hunk as well, making him look really, really cool. So I've set up a few of the miniatures here at the end just to show you guys a little video of some of the bits that we've painted on the channel, you know, the zombies and the dogs, the hounds and things like that. And all in all, this is both Hunk and Tofu complete. You'll have to let me know in the comments below what you think of this, especially with such a limited monochrome sort of palette. I've had a real good time doing this. It's been a lot of fun and been very, very different. So like I say, let me know in the comments below what you think. Let me know which one your favorite is. Let me know if you beat the original version of the game, because that was a tough game. So yeah, as always, my friends, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for your comments, your support, your kindness, your positivity. This channel is becoming something special, and I really, really do thank you from the bottom of my heart. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Let me know which one of the two of these are your favorites, and let me know what you think of the video. As always, my friends, please take care of yourselves, and I will see you guys in the next video.